Roger Miller had recorded Bobby McGee, and it wasn't a big hit or anything for him, but it was Bobby Newirth, who was Dylan's roadie back in the Don't Look Back days, and songwriter, singer. He had was a friend of Janis's, and I think he worked with Albert Grossman, who was managing both Dylan and Janis. And he taught her the song before I met either one of them. I was down in Peru doing a movie with Dennis Hopper that he did right after Easy Rider. Crazy story. But anyway, when I got back, a photographer told me that Janis had sung the song at a concert she did in Nashville. And later on, just a few months later on, Bobby introduced me to her, Bobby Newirth, and we stayed at her house there for a month or so, out in Largsburg, California. Got very close, but I never heard her sing the song, and it was difficult to listen to because I'd never heard her singing it when she was alive. When I went down to see what had happened to her, her producer told me to come by the studio and played it for me that day. And as a matter of fact, I got to the point where I knew I was going to be hearing it on the radio, and because it was a hit. So I was listening to it one night over at this place that I was talking about, where we used to hang out, and just listened to it over and over again, so I could get steeled to it. So it wouldn't destroy me every time. Yeah. And Donnie came in, the two of us were the only ones in the building, and we listened to it over and over again. Then we wrote a song called Epitaph. And
Why Was She Born So Black and Blue?
Why Was She Born So Black and Blue, yeah. Hell, our fourth gig was the Isle of Wight.
Yeah.
With 500,000 people who hated us. They were going to kill us. But they hated everybody there.
Yeah, that night they hated
They
everybody.
even hated Jimi Hendrix. It was awful. But I closed the set with it, me and Bob McGee, and walked off giving 500,000 people the finger.
I know.
And I started at the Troubadour. There was people giving us scripts all the time. In fact, Harry Dean Stanton, who used to sit around and sing with us, he brought me a script of Cisco Pike's. It's called Dealer at the time. And he helped me do a screen test on it. And I got the gig, and it got me other. It was not a great movie, but a lot of good people in it, like Gene Hackman.
Yeah.
When I got the possibility of working with Sam Peckinpah, I had just finished seeing Straw Dogs, which was a powerful, and The Wild Bunch, and Ride the High Country. Those were probably still my favorite Peckinpah movie. The opportunity to play Billy the Kid in a film with all those great people. Every great country character actor seemed to be in that film, and Donnie Fritz as well. Sam took a liking to him, and I remember him saying, "There's more casting in that chair right there than pointing at Donnie."
I remember how nervous you were. You wouldn't even come to the set that day because you had no idea what was going to happen. You know?
Well, you were a big part of that.
No, and the thing was, I really didn't have any lines in it. So we started filming that one because I was nervous and had all these different things going, but Sam stops the filming. And of course, just about everybody else was there, Harry, Dean, all these people watching this thing, probably to see what was going to happen. And he stopped the film and said, "Well, you need to say something." And and so he stopped filming, and we went to his trailer, and he said, I tell you what you do. Just repeat what people say anytime you feel like it.
And it really worked.
And so that was my part. I said, "Great, I won't have to
private parts."
Private parts, Of course, I had no idea about acting or how movies were made. He said, "We'll go up to the scene where Bob knocks Donnie out of the chair." with a shotgun. I didn't know that was coming, So it was a lot of tension and everything was involved with the scene and everything. But anyway, it was just a great experience.
I was scared to death. Sam liked to have a lot of tension on his set, and he had it. And it's usually because of, by the time I got along doing films with him, it was because of conflicts he was having with the studio and with the producers. And it was a pretty volatile atmosphere over there.
One time when we were filming Your Death Scene, we had me and Bob and I think it's Luke asked you had this kind of a long walk to come up to the porch where you've been shot, And so, I had the mark where I was supposed to be, and so all Sam could see was something was wrong. He blamed it on me, He started screaming. I said, wait a damn minute, I mean, of course, I would never talk back to him, but this was one time I knew I was right, I said, Bob was supposed to lean against a post or something on the porch and I was standing beside him, something like that. I said, so it really wasn't my fault. He said, well, if he does it again, knock his ass off the porch. Oh, like I'm going to knock the hell out of Bob Dylan. Sure. Yeah, like I would do that. But anyway, I mean, like I say, he was...
You know what was funny was what happened in that same scene. They were shooting at first, they were shooting sunset for sunrise, which meant you had a very, very narrow amount of time to film in, just to when the sun was just right, just at the horizon. And really only time to do it once. And right when we were shooting this is the whole movie. In the background they had decided to go jogging. Harry Dean and Bob Dylan went jogging to the scene. And when they came back, the set was just like, you could give it a pin drop. Nobody had the nerve to say anything to anybody. They were all just sitting there. And Sam says, you just cost me, I forget how many, thousands of dollars. And he said this to Harry Dean. And Harry Dean said, Sam, I was running after him trying to stop him.
I was trying to catch him.
And Sam picked up this knife off of the table and threw it and hit the door right by Harry Dean. He was a violent man.
Well, he pulled a gun on me and Harry Dean.
Yes, and I had to go take it away from him.
Yeah, Kris had to come in.
They called me up in the middle of the night.
Harry and I just gone to visit him one day. He was real sick. It was a Sunday. We weren't working. Walked up to his bedroom, and I mean, before he knew it, Sam had that gun right in front of us. I mean, I said, Sam, it's Donnie's Harry, And he kind of realized what had happened. He just fell back.
Yeah,
he
was in bad shape.
He was in real bad.
Sick.
So I went home and told Kris about it, and Kris went and took his gun. Got his gun away.
He was a little kid. I just give it to me. He just acted like a little. Everybody was conscious of his trying to make something great. He wasn't just trying to go out and do a daytime job. He was trying to make a great piece of art. And he had to fight to do it because he was getting, the money people were on his back all the time. It was unfortunate in my eyes because I think that so much creative energy got wasted just fighting the studio and fighting the money people. I had a feeling that Sam was always trying to make a good film from the beginning.
That's all that mattered.
And I think it got harder for him as he got sicker and the drinking got sometimes out of hand. And but it was always because he was fighting to make this beautiful picture. Mm-hmm. Sam had blind spots. I don't think that he ever really appreciated how great the soundtrack that Bob Dylan wrote was, because he had old friends who had you know, had scored his films before, but the soundtrack was wonderful. And when I saw that Knocking on Heaven's Door come up during the Slim Pickens death scene, it just blew me away. It was a perfect match of music.
That was one of the great scenes in movie history.
Yeah, but you know what's also interesting was that the lines in it came from real life, where he says it's getting dark, too dark to see. They had sent a print of the scene down to Durango, and when we looked at it, it was too dark. And Sam went up, hissed on the screen. And I remember Bob looking over at me. He hadn't been to any dailies before, and he thought, "What have you got me into here? This is insane." I love Bob Dylan. I think he's, you know, he was the songwriter of my lifetime. He probably had a bigger effect on songwriting than anybody. He affected the Beatles. He affected everybody. And he brought respect. So I figured that a Bob Dylan soundtrack for that thing, not that it was my decision, but I thought it was the best thing that could happen to the film. Yeah, because he hadn't done the music for a film yet. And I think that was part of Sam's resentment, was he thought that the producers had brought Bob in to make the film commercial. But he loved, when Bob first got down there, he sang that song he'd written about Billy. Mm-hmm. And Sam made him play it all day long. He sat over there at the house and played that song over and over. Great song. Yeah, we hung out. I drank a lot of whiskey with him down there in Durango. Unfortunately, by the time we got to Convoy, I had gone on the wagon, and that kind of broke down communication between me and Sam for a while. But the heart shows up in all his best films. He's a pushover. You know, he's a real softy inside. I think that's why he behaved so badly a lot of times. I think he was a soldier, which he was, a Marine, who was horrified by war. And the things that he was horrified were also the things that he was, that he had to examine, you know, in such close-up, slow-motion detail. I would hate to think that the movie business didn't have a place for Sam Peckinpah or John Huston or anybody who was really creative. But the process over the last 20 years has been one of money being more important really than anything else. And I keep thinking of when Michael Cimino went to Cannes, Auerbach, who was the head of the studio, had a big front page story the day that they were going to screen Heaven's Gate, saying that unless the money was taken out of the hands of the creative people, the industry was headed for disaster. I remember saying to him, "Who are you going to give it to? The uncreative people?" You know, and his lawyer said, "Well, was it your money?"
We were absolutely the luckiest people in the world.
Lucked into it at the beginning of the 70s and stayed in it. You know, it was just, it was amazing to me that we weren't more amazed by the fact that we were working with people of caliber we were. You know, because we didn't come up through the system, you know, and pay our dues that way like we had done in music.
I knew that Sam was getting a lot of flack from the studio. I knew that Jim Aubrey, Dan Melnick were all on top of him to make sure that the movie was run smoothly, and he was up against an antagonist that he wasn't happy about. They wanted him to take away the lyrical aspects of the movie, and they wanted another Wild Bunch. They didn't want a lyrical parable. They didn't want a ballad. They didn't want a piece of poetry, which is what Sam wanted. So those were the conflicts that he had right from the start. Sam categorized the people he liked and disliked, And studio, the word studio for Sam was like a sort of red flag to a bull.
MGM, at least as nearly as I can understand it, did not have any direct hand in what is known as the theatrical version. That version was still only ever prepared by Peckinpah's editors and by Sam himself. One of the things that makes this so complicated is that MGM did apparently, in fact, hire another team of editors who, I believe, I was told, prepared a 95-minute version of Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, which cut everything out of it except the action and the shooting and the bare minimum of exposition to get you from one to another. I believe Pauline Kael once said that there was even talk of Sam's considering letting the studio release that version just to show how damaging the Aubrey regime was.
We had major problems with the Panasonic 40-inch lens. We had to reshoot a lot of stuff because of it. I think Sam used that as an excuse in many areas, but it became an integral part of the problem that was happening. Everybody got sick. Everybody was ill. Everybody got sick. Sam got very ill. I became the B-12 shooter to the stars. I mean, I had people lined up outside Sam's trailer. I was keeping everybody alive. Jim Coburn got so sick at one point he couldn't remember shooting one scene whatsoever. He said to Sam one day, "When are we going to shoot the scene of me coming out of the whorehouse?" And Sam said, "We've already shot it." And he had no recollection whatsoever of shooting it. Every step of the way there was a battle, and it was a real shame. I mean, we were hiding shots. We were pretending we hadn't shot something when we had. We knew stuff was going to be eliminated. It was a sort of Major Dundee rehash.
Here is part of the additional problem that this whole movie brings up, and that is that the release of the movie was rushed. And it was rushed by several months because at that time MGM needed to get as much cash on the books as it could because it was building the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. And so decisions were being made right and left. Versions were being tried without fully being able to finesse them. I mean, Sam's editors, Roger Spotswood in particular, Garth, Bob Wolfe, Robert Wolfe, who had worked on him with him, and I mean, they did a heroic job at getting this picture prepared and all that. But as I've said, they basically had about a month to fine cut it, and you absolutely can't do that with a Peckinpah film. It needs massaging more.
Dan Melnick brought in his own editing staff. We cut ours, he cut his. Jerry Harvey took it upon himself to release on Z Channel Sam's original cut. He, unfortunately, is no longer with us, but he can take full credit for releasing Sam's cut of Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid.
What the director's cut in the trade actually means is the cut of the film that the director is guaranteed is his, that must be delivered to the studio usually within 10 weeks of the completion of principal photography. Now, for most films, that is a comfortable amount of time to get the film into a good playable cut. But also most of the time, that version of the film has rarely been played for audiences, certainly not for large audiences. All of its sound effects are temporary. Its dialogue is still usually rough production dialogue that has not been finessed, and most of the time it's all temporary music, which is the same music that's been found from other sources and made to work. The reality is, very, very few directors, and Peckinpah was no exception to this, would ever actually want their director's cuts to be released theatrically. What they ideally would want is to be able to continue to refine that director's cut with the preview process and so forth, and continued working with the material. But what the director's cut really means is just that cut that they prepared for the studio within 10 weeks of the completion of principal photography.
There were reports in Variety that he was drunk on the set and couldn't deal with what was going on. We issued a whole press release which was a picture of Sam on a gurney with Jim Coburn and John Beck and various other actors and crew people, and I held in my hand a whiskey bottle with a intravenous tube that was going into his arm, and the title of the photograph said that there is no truth to the rumor that Sam Peckinpah is drinking on the set. It was not a happy film. He was at odds with people that he used to be friends with, i.e. Dan Melnick. He loathed Jim Aubrey, who ran the studio. Lou Rackmill, who was a friend of his, was coming down and trying to be the sort of the pacifier. It was an awkward, difficult, and very unpleasant situation that ran throughout the entire film.
As the years have gone by, a number of Peckinpah's greatest admirers have come to regard Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid as one of his greatest achievements. In the main, I agree with that. I mean, I would have to lie to say that I think it's a comparable achievement to The Wild Bunch, which I don't believe it is. I believe there are a number of scenes in Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid that go slack, that aren't fully realized. I mean, one of the more problematic ones, for example, is the death of Paco, where Billy discovers that Paco has been killed, and then he turns, and that's the motivating event that sends him back to New Mexico. I mean, think of this scene. I don't know what Sam was thinking when he directed it, but it's certainly very odd that Billy just gets up and rides away and leaves presumably his daughter there to bury him. I mean, he leaves her in dangerous country and just rides off. This is a very, very curious scene, and there are a number of scenes like that in the movie that just don't quite represent Peckinpah, I think, at his sharpest.
He could have played the studio game, which he didn't. Anybody else would have played it better than he did. I don't think Sam was very good at playing the studio game. He could have won a lot of battles that he didn't by the way he handled the battles. I sometimes found it very difficult to be the intermediary, which is what I became. I found it more and more difficult to come up with excuses. I found it more and more difficult to rationalize for them his way of dealing with situations. It wasn't easy to be the mediator. He could have made his life much simpler, but he decided to, put on the boxing gloves, right or wrong. Sam was the sort of person that if he didn't have a nemesis, he couldn't be creative. He needed that to be creative.
The opening of the movie is a wonderful example where, as Garrett gets up to leave and Holly's, don't press your luck, it's not my luck I'm worried about, and then Garrett leaves, adios, adios. Then Holly says, why don't you kill him? And Billy says, why? He's my friend. And that's where the scene peaks. That is, in fact, where it demands to go out. If you look at the director's cut, you'll see it goes on for several more beats. Now, that's how it was written. Sam was right to shoot it that way. He was right to cut it that way because you want to see it. When movies are cut, and here I'm speaking as an editor, you can never watch the whole movie until you have the whole movie cut.
There was something about him that turned men and women on around him. There was something electric about him, and destructive, and hurtful, and sadistic about him. And yet people were drawn to him like magnets.
The vision in this movie does remain intact. Indeed, it remains almost heroically expressed, it seems to me, in art, and it does seem to me to be about as bleak and black and grim, as desolate a vision, certainly as Peckinpah has ever given us.